Picture this. You're scrolling through LinkedIn on a Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, when you see a post that makes you stop mid-sip. It's from someone you thought had disappeared into domestic bliss years ago. The post reads, "After 5 years of being told I chose to be a trophy wife, I'm proud to announce that my marketing consultancy just hit 7 figures. To everyone who counted me out, thank you for the motivation." The post has thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, and shares that keep climbing. But here's the twist. Her husband, who spent years telling their social circle that she quit her VP position to live the easy life, is now frantically calling everyone they know, trying to control a narrative that's already spiraled completely out of his hands. This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, and how one LinkedIn update exposed years of lies, shattered a carefully constructed image, and proved that sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one sleeping right next to you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Part 1. The Suffocating Reality. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and if you had asked me 5 years ago where I thought I'd be today, I would have painted you a picture of corner offices, international campaigns, and maybe even my own agency. I was the VP of marketing at TechVision, one of Austin's fastest-growing tech companies. I had a team of 12, a budget that most people only dream of, and clients who specifically requested me by name. I was featured in Austin Business Journal as one of their rising stars under 40, and I had speaking engagements booked 6 months in advance. But life has a funny way of derailing even the most carefully planned trajectories. I met Mark at a networking event downtown. He was charming, successful, and owned Mitchell Property Group, which was making waves in Austin's booming real estate market. He drove a Tesla, wore custom suits, and had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room when he spoke to you. Our courtship felt like something out of a romantic movie. Expensive dinners, weekend trips to hill country, and promises of building an empire together. The problems didn't start immediately. They never do they? At first, Mark was supportive of my career. He'd attend company events with me, charm my colleagues, and even offer insights about the Austin business landscape that proved helpful for my campaigns. But somewhere between our engagement and Emma's birth, something shifted. The support became suggestions. The suggestions became expectations. And the expectations became demands. It started small. Mark would make comments about how late I was, working, how stressed I seemed, how maybe I should consider scaling back once the baby arrived. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone," he'd say, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I worked on my laptop at our kitchen island. "I make enough for both of us. Why don't you focus on being the best mom you can be?" After Emma was born, the pressure intensified. Mark's mother, Linda, moved into our guest house temporarily to help with the baby. What that really meant was having another voice in my ear about how career women neglect their families, how children need their mothers at home, and how I was lucky to have a husband who could afford to let me relax. The breaking point came when Emma was 2. I had just closed the biggest campaign in TechVision's history, a multi-million-dollar deal with a Fortune 500 company that wanted to establish their Southwest headquarters in Austin. I was riding high, fielding calls from headhunters and seriously considering offers that would have doubled my salary. That's when Mark sat me down for what he called a serious conversation about our future. "Sarah, honey, you're incredible at what you do," he began, using that tone that made my skin crawl because I knew a but was coming. "But Emma needs consistency. She needs her mom around. And honestly, watching you juggle everything, it's not healthy. You're exhausted all the time. You barely see our daughter. And when you are home, you're on your phone dealing with work emergencies." I tried to argue. I pointed out that he traveled for business constantly, that his work often kept him out, until well past Emma's bedtime, that I had never complained about his schedule. but Mark had an answer for everything. He was building something for our family's future. His work was more established, more stable. And besides, didn't I want to be present for Emma's childhood? The final nail in the coffin came during a dinner party at our house. I was in the kitchen, trying to manage appetizers while fielding an urgent call from a client whose campaign was launching the next morning. Mark walked in, took the phone from my hand, and told my client that I was unavailable for the evening because I was hosting. The humiliation burned in my chest as I heard him say, "Sarah's prioritizing family time these days. I'm sure you understand." After our guests left, Mark cornered me in our bedroom. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said, his voice rising. "You can't even host our friends without work interrupting. What kind of impression does that give people? That I can't provide for my family? That my wife has to work because I'm not successful enough?" That's when I realized this was never about Emma's well-being or my stress levels. This was about Mark's ego. He wanted a wife who reflected his success, not one who had her own. The psychological warfare was subtle but effective. Mark would make comments about other wives in our social circle, how put together they always looked, how they were so supportive of their husbands' careers, how their children seemed so well-adjusted because they had consistent parenting. He'd praise Jessica Torres, his new business partner, for being so dedicated to their projects, working late hours without letting family obligations interfere. The irony wasn't lost on me. Meanwhile, Linda would make passive-aggressive comments about working mothers whenever I'd rush in from the office. "Oh, Sarah, you look so tired. Maybe you should consider taking a step back. Emma asked for you 3 times today, but I told her mommy was busy with work again." She'd say it with a smile, but the message was crystal clear. The worst part was how they made me feel guilty for loving my work. I was good at what I did. Really good. My campaigns won awards. My strategies drove real results. My team respected me. But at home, my career was treated like a selfish hobby that I needed to outgrow. By the time Emma turned 3, the pressure had become unbearable. Mark started making unilateral decisions about our social calendar, accepting invitations to events during times when I had important work commitments. When I'd protest, he'd sigh dramatically and say, "I guess I'll have to go alone again," and explain why my wife prioritizes her job over our marriage. The breaking point came during Austin's biggest annual business gala. I was supposed to give a keynote speech about innovative marketing strategies in tech. This was huge for me, the kind of visibility that opens doors and establishes thought leadership. But Mark had scheduled a last-minute dinner with potential investors for the same night, and when I told him I couldn't make it, he exploded. "This is ridiculous, Sarah. You're choosing some speech over our financial future. Do you know how long I've been trying to get in front of these guys? But no, you have to be the center of attention at some industry circle jerk instead of supporting your husband's actual business." When I tried to explain the importance of the keynote, he laughed. "Marketing speeches don't pay the mortgage, Sarah. My deals do. Your little campaigns are nice, but let's be realistic about which career actually matters here." That night, I called in sick to the gala and attended Mark's dinner. I watched him schmooze his potential investors while I sat there, smiling prettily, asking about their wives and children, playing the role of the supportive spouse. And as I sat there, something inside me died a little. The final psychological blow came 6 months later. Mark had been working more closely with Jessica, his business partner, and their success was evident. They were closing bigger deals, expanding into new markets, and Mark's confidence was at an all-time high. During a neighborhood barbecue, I overheard him talking to our neighbors about our respective careers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Sarah's been thinking about stepping back from the corporate grind," he said, his arm casually draped around my shoulders. She's realized that being a mom and supporting the family from home is more fulfilling than chasing promotions. She wants to focus on what really matters, raising Emma and being there for our family. I felt my face burn with humiliation. I had never said any of those things. But as I looked around at our neighbors nodding approvingly, talking about how smart I was to prioritize family, I realized that Mark had been crafting this narrative for months. In his version of our story, I was choosing domestic bliss over career ambition. I was the wife who had figured out what really mattered. The truth was, I felt like I was disappearing. Every day, I went through the motions of my high-powered job while coming home to a family that treated my success as an inconvenience. My daughter barely knew what I did for work, because Mark would change the subject whenever she asked. My mother-in-law would make comments about how career women always regret missing their children's best years. And my husband would undermine my professional achievements while publicly praising other women for the very dedication he criticized in me. I started having panic attacks in my office bathroom. I'd lock the door and sit on the floor, trying to remember who I was before I became this version of myself that everyone else seemed to prefer. I was successful, respected, and financially independent, but I felt smaller and more insignificant every day. The final straw came during Emma's 4th birthday party. I had taken the afternoon off to help set up and be present for the celebration, but halfway through the party, I received an urgent call about a campaign crisis that needed immediate attention. As I stepped away to handle it, I heard Mark talking to another dad. "Sarah just can't seem to let work go," he said with a chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. "I keep telling her that Emma's childhood is more important than whatever marketing emergency she thinks she needs to solve. But you know how career women are. They think the world will end if they're not constantly putting out fires." The other dad laughed and replied, "You're a saint for putting up with it, man. My wife learned years ago that family comes first. Maybe Sarah will figure it out eventually." Standing in my own backyard, listening to my husband publicly diminish my work while positioning himself as the long-suffering spouse, I felt something crack inside me. This wasn't about balance or priorities or Emma's well-being. This was about control. Mark wanted a wife who reflected his success, not one who had her own. And somehow, I had let him convince me that my ambitions were selfish, that my achievements were less important than his comfort. That night, after Emma was asleep and the house was quiet, I sat in my home office staring at my laptop screen. My LinkedIn profile still showed me as VP of Marketing at TechVision, but it felt like a lie. Who was I really? Was I the accomplished executive who had built campaigns that generated millions in revenue? Or was I the overwhelmed working mom who couldn't balance her priorities properly? As I scrolled through my connections, seeing updates from former colleagues who had been promoted, launched their own companies, or taken on exciting new challenges, I felt a familiar pang of envy mixed with regret. These could have been my updates. These could have been my victories. But instead, I was trapped in a life where my biggest achievement was successfully hosting a children's birthday party without letting work interfere too much. The house felt suffocating that night. Mark was already asleep, exhausted from his own demanding schedule, while Linda puttered around the kitchen, cleaning up party remnants and making subtle comments about how much better the celebration could have been if I had taken the whole day off instead of just the afternoon. I closed my laptop and walked out to our back patio, looking out at the manicured lawn and perfectly maintained pool that represented everything Mark had built for our family. It was beautiful, expensive, and felt like a prison. Somewhere along the way, I had traded my identity for security, my ambitions for approval, my voice for peace. But as I stood there in the Texas humidity, listening to the cicadas and distant traffic, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to disappear quietly into the role of trophy wife that Mark had scripted for me. I wasn't going to let him rewrite the story of who I was and what I was capable of achieving. I just didn't know yet how dramatically that decision would reshape all of our lives. The realization didn't come like a bolt of lightning. It crept in slowly over the following weeks, like water seeping through cracks in a foundation until the whole structure becomes unstable. I found myself paying attention to conversations differently, noticing the subtle ways Mark positioned himself as the provider and me as the dependent. I started cataloging the small humiliations, the casual dismissals, the way my professional opinions were brushed aside at dinner parties while his were treated as gospel. The morning that changed everything started like any other. I was getting Emma ready for school while simultaneously reviewing a presentation on my phone for a client meeting later that day. Linda was in the kitchen making breakfast, and Mark was getting dressed for an early meeting with potential investors for a new development project. Emma was struggling with her backpack zipper, and as I knelt down to help her, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from my team. The client presentation had hit a snag. Their CEO wanted to move the meeting up by 2 hours, which meant I needed to be downtown by 9 instead of 11. "Mommy, you're not listening to me," Emma said, tugging on my sleeve as I typed a quick response to my team. "I'm sorry, baby. What did you say?" I asked, finally giving her my full attention. "I said my teacher wants to meet with you and Daddy about my reading group. She gave me this letter." Emma pulled a crumpled paper from her backpack. I scanned the note quickly. It was a request for a parent-teacher conference to discuss Emma's advancement to a higher reading level. Good news that required scheduling a meeting during school hours. "This is wonderful, Em. You're doing so well in reading," I said, genuinely proud, but already mentally calculating how to fit another meeting into my packed schedule. That's when Mark walked into the kitchen, adjusting his tie and grabbing his coffee mug. He looked polished and confident, ready to charm his way through another successful business meeting. "What's wonderful?" he asked, kissing Emma on the top of her head. "Emma's teacher wants to meet with us about moving her to advanced reading," I explained, handing him the letter. Mark glanced at it briefly and nodded. "Great. Can you handle that?" "I've got back-to-back meetings this week, and next week Jessica and I are flying to Houston to look at a potential acquisition." Something about the casual way he assumed I would handle it alone, combined with the mention of Jessica and their business trip, triggered something in me. "Actually, I have a pretty packed schedule too. Maybe we could both rearrange things since it's about our daughter's education." Mark looked up from his phone, surprised by my response. "Sarah, come on. You know how important this Houston deal is. Besides, you're better at the school stuff anyway. Emma's more comfortable when you handle these things." "But she'd probably like to have both her parents there," I pressed, feeling something unfamiliar rising in my chest. Resistance. Linda, who had been listening from the kitchen, chimed in with her usual helpful commentary. "Sarah, dear, Mark's business commitments are so demanding right now. Surely you can handle one little school meeting. It's not like they're discussing anything complicated." The dismissal in her voice made my teeth clench. "Actually, educational development is quite complex, Linda. And I have business commitments, too." Mark's head snapped up at my tone. I had never spoken to his mother that way before. "Sarah, what's gotten into you lately? You've been so argumentative." That word, argumentative, hit me like a slap. When had standing up for myself become argumentative? When had expressing my own needs become unreasonable? "I'm not being argumentative," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I'm simply suggesting that we both prioritize our daughter's education. And I'm simply saying that I trust you to handle it," Mark replied, his tone now carrying a warning edge. "You're her mother. This is what mothers do." I stared at him, this man I had loved enough to marry, who was now reducing my role to, "This is what mothers do," while his role apparently required jet-setting to Houston with his attractive business partner. After Mark left for his meeting and Emma was safely at school, I found myself sitting in my car in the TechVision parking garage, unable to move. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't figure out why a simple conversation about a parent-teacher Conference had left me feeling so rattled. That's when it hit me. The shaking wasn't from anger, it was from recognition. For the first time in years, I had felt like myself in that kitchen. The Sarah who used to negotiate million-dollar contracts, who commanded respect in boardrooms, who never let anyone dismiss her professional obligations as less important than their own. That Sarah had surfaced for just a moment, and it had felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I pulled out my phone and looked at my calendar. Meeting after meeting, client calls, strategy sessions, budget reviews. My schedule was just as demanding as Mark's, but somehow his work was treated as sacred, while mine was seen as flexible, disposable, secondary. During my lunch break, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my old college roommate, Rachel, who now ran her own consulting firm in Denver. We had kept in touch sporadically over the years, but our conversations had become increasingly surface level as my life became more consumed with managing everyone else's needs. "Sarah, this is such a nice surprise." Rachel's voice was warm and familiar. "How are things in Austin?" For a moment, I almost gave my standard response. "Everything's great, Mark's business is booming, Emma's doing well in school, we're all very blessed." But something stopped me. "Actually, Rachel, I think I'm having some kind of identity crisis," I said, surprising myself with my honesty. There was a pause, then Rachel's voice became more focused. "Talk to me. What's going on?" And for the next 30 minutes, I found myself telling her everything. The gradual erosion of support for my career, the way my accomplishments were minimized, the constant pressure to prioritize everyone else's needs above my own, the growing feeling that I was disappearing into a role I had never consciously chosen. Rachel listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah," she finally said, "do you remember senior year when you landed that internship at the marketing firm in Chicago? You were so excited because the creative director told you that you had a natural instinct for strategy that couldn't be taught." I remembered. That internship had been pivotal in shaping my career path. The creative director, a woman named Margaret Chen, had become my first professional mentor. "You called me that night," Rachel continued, "and you said something I've never forgotten. You said, 'I finally found something I'm not just good at, I'm exceptional at, and I'm going to build something amazing with this gift.'" Tears started forming in my eyes as I remembered that version of myself, young, ambitious, certain of her own worth. "What happened to that woman, Sarah?" Rachel asked gently. "Because from what you're telling me, she's still in there. She's just been buried under a lot of other people's expectations." That afternoon, I found myself staying late at the office, not because of work demands, but because I needed time to think. I pulled up my old portfolios, looking through campaigns I had created, strategies I had developed, problems I had solved. Each project represented a piece of myself that I had poured into my work: creativity, analytical thinking, leadership, innovation. When had I started believing that these skills were less valuable than Mark's ability to flip properties? When had I accepted the narrative that my contributions to our family's financial security were somehow less significant than his? I opened a new document on my computer and started writing. Not a campaign brief or a strategy memo, but something more personal. I wrote about who I had been before I became Mark's wife and Emma's mother. I wrote about my dreams, my ambitions, the company I had once imagined starting, the impact I had wanted to make in the business world. As I wrote, I realized that somewhere along the way, I had stopped advocating for myself. I had become so focused on keeping peace in my marriage, on being the supportive wife, that I had forgotten that partnerships require mutual support. Mark expected me to accommodate his schedule, celebrate his successes, and minimize my own needs. But when was the last time he had done the same for me? That evening, when I arrived home later than usual, Mark was already there, helping Emma with her homework at the kitchen table. Linda was preparing dinner, and the scene looked picture-perfect. The successful businessman taking time to be a devoted father. "There she is," Mark said when I walked in, but his tone was slightly sharp. "Emma was asking where you were." "I got caught up finishing a project," I explained, setting down my bag and kissing Emma's forehead. "How was your day, sweetheart?" "Daddy's helping me with math," Emma said proudly. "He's really good at numbers." "Daddy is good at lots of things," I agreed, but I noticed how Mark's chest puffed slightly at the praise. Linda looked up from the stove. "Sarah, dinner's almost ready. I wasn't sure when you'd be home, so I went ahead and started without knowing your schedule." The implication was clear. My unpredictable work schedule was inconveniencing the family. Routine. "Actually," I said, settling into a chair next to Emma, "I might need to adjust my schedule more often. I've been thinking about taking on some additional responsibilities at work." Mark's hand paused over Emma's math worksheet. "What kind of additional responsibilities?" "There's a possibility of leading a new division focused on startup marketing. It would mean more travel, longer hours initially, but it's exactly the kind of opportunity I've been hoping for." The kitchen went quiet except for the sound of Linda's wooden spoon stirring something on the stove. Mark set down his pen and looked at me directly. "Sarah, we've talked about this. Emma needs consistency right now. And honestly, you're already stretched pretty thin with your current workload." "I'm managing my current workload just fine," I replied, hearing an edge in my voice that surprised even me. "Are you?" Mark's eyebrow raised. "Because I seem to remember you missing Emma's school play last month because of a client emergency. And what about tonight? Emma asked for you 3 times before I got home." I felt the familiar guilt creeping in, but this time I pushed back against it. "And how many times have you missed bedtime because of your work? How many school events have you skipped for business meetings? But somehow that's different?" Linda cleared her throat pointedly. "Perhaps this isn't a conversation for little ears?" Emma had stopped working on her math and was looking between her parents with the expression children get when they sense adult tension they don't understand. Mark forced a smile and ruffled Emma's hair. "Grandma's right. Let's finish this worksheet. And then maybe we can all watch a movie together." But the conversation wasn't finished, and we both knew it. Later that evening, after Emma was in bed and Linda had retreated to her guest house, Mark cornered me in our bedroom. "What's really going on with you, Sarah?" he asked, sitting on the edge of our bed while I changed into pajamas. "This isn't like you." "What isn't like me? Having career ambitions?" "Being so." He paused, searching for the right word. "Selfish about your career. We have a good life. Emma's happy. You're successful at your current job. I'm building something significant. With the business. Why rock the boat?" Selfish. There was that word again. My career ambitions were selfish, but his were necessary. My work commitments were inconvenient, but his were important. "Mark, do you remember when we first met? What attracted you to me?" He looked surprised by the question. "Of course. You were confident, successful, passionate about your work. You had this energy about you, like you could accomplish anything you set your mind to." "And what happened to that woman?" Mark frowned. "What do you mean? You're still successful. You still accomplish things. But I'm not allowed to be passionate about it anymore. I'm not allowed to prioritize it or pursue bigger opportunities because that would be selfish. I'm supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps of ambition fit neatly around everyone else's needs." "That's not fair, Sarah. I've never told you that you couldn't work." "No, but you've told me how I should work. Part-time priorities, flexible schedule, nothing that interferes with your plans or Emma's routine or your mother's expectations. You fell in love with an ambitious woman, but you want to be married to a convenient one." Mark was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him processing what I had said. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer but still defensive. I want to be married to a woman who prioritizes our family. Is that really so unreasonable? Not if you do the same thing, I replied. But you don't, Mark. You prioritize your career and expect me to prioritize it too. Your Houston trip with Jessica next week, when's the last time you asked if that was convenient for our family schedule? His jaw tightened at the mention of Jessica, and I realized I had hit on something sensitive. That's business, Sarah, and Jessica is my business partner. We're not going to Houston to have fun. We're trying to close a deal that could set us up for the next 5 years. And the startup marketing division I mentioned isn't business? It's not about our family's future financial security? Mark stood up abruptly and walked to our bedroom window, looking out at our backyard. It's different. How? How is it different? He turned back to me, and for the first time in our conversation, he looked uncertain. Because I'm the primary breadwinner. My business carries more risk, more responsibility. If I fail, we lose everything. If your startup division doesn't work out, you still have your regular job to fall back on. And there it was, the heart of it. In Mark's mind, he was the real provider, the one with the serious career, the one whose professional decisions mattered. I was just the wife, with a job, playing at business while he handled the real responsibility of supporting our family. Mark, I said quietly, do you know how much money my campaigns have generated for TechVision in the past 3 years? He shrugged. I'm sure it's substantial. $12 million in new business. $12 million. And that's just the contracts. I directly landed, not including the retention and expansion of existing accounts that resulted from my strategies. Mark's expression shifted slightly, but he didn't respond. Do you know what my salary and bonuses have contributed to our household income over the past 5 years? I continued. Because I do. I know exactly how much of Emma's private school tuition comes from my paycheck. I know how much of our mortgage payment, our vacation fund, our retirement savings comes from what I earn. Sarah, I never said your income wasn't important. But you've never treated it as important. You've treated it as supplemental, disposable, something that should bend around everyone else's needs because it's not really necessary. I walked over to our dresser and pulled out a folder I had been keeping in my lingerie drawer. Financial. Documents I had been reviewing for weeks as this awareness grew. Here, I said, handing him a spreadsheet I had created. This breaks down our family income by source over the past 5 years. Look at it. Mark took the papers reluctantly, and I watched his face change as he studied the numbers. My income wasn't supplemental, it was substantial. In some years, it had been nearly equal to his. In the year Emma was born, when his business hit a rough patch, it had been higher. I didn't realize. He started, then stopped. You didn't realize because you didn't want to realize. It was easier to maintain the fiction that you're the provider and I'm the grateful beneficiary than to acknowledge that we're partners who both contribute significantly to our family's success. Mark set the papers down on the dresser and rubbed his face with both hands. So what are you saying, Sarah? What do you want? I want what you have, I said simply. I want a spouse who celebrates my successes instead of minimizing them. I want someone who accommodates my schedule sometimes instead of always expecting me to accommodate theirs. I want to pursue the startup division opportunity without being made to feel guilty about it. And if I can't give you that, the question came out harder than I think he intended. Then we have a problem, I replied, surprised by my own directness. We stood there in our bedroom, looking at each other across a divide that had been growing for years, but was only now becoming visible. I realized that this conversation was just the beginning, that the woman I had been before my marriage was waking up, and she wasn't going to go quietly back to sleep. Part 3. The Alternative Glimpse. 3 days after my confrontation with Mark, I was in downtown Austin for a client meeting when I quite literally ran into my past. I was rushing across 2nd Street, juggling my phone, coffee, and a portfolio case, when I collided with someone coming out of a coffee shop. "I'm so sorry," I started to say, looking up to see if I had spilled coffee on the other person. That's when I found myself staring into familiar dark eyes that I hadn't seen in person for over 8 years. "Sarah Chen?" The voice was deeper than I remembered, but unmistakably belonging to James Chen, my study partner from business school, and the man who had offered me a job in Seattle the same week Mark had proposed. "James!" I couldn't hide my surprise. "What are you doing in Austin?" He grinned, that same easy smile that had made him popular with professors and classmates alike. "I could ask you the same thing. Last I heard, you were conquering the marketing world in Chicago." "Chicago was a long time ago," I said, suddenly self-conscious about how I must look, harried, over-caffeinated, probably showing the stress that had become my constant companion. "I'm at TechVision now, have been for about 6 years." "TechVision? Impressive. I've heard good things about their marketing team." James paused, studying my face. You look exactly like you did in Professor Martinez's strategic marketing class when you were about to present a campaign that would blow everyone else out of the water." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I was actually just heading to a client presentation." "Old habits," James laughed. Still the overachiever who makes the rest of us look bad. There was something about the way he said it, with genuine admiration instead of the subtle resentment I had grown accustomed to at home, that made me pause. "What about you?" I asked. "Are you still in Seattle?" "Actually, I just moved here about 6 months ago. My company, Green Tech Solutions, opened an Austin office. We're focusing on sustainable technology solutions for commercial real estate development. The market here is exploding, and we wanted to be part of it." "Green Tech Solutions," I repeated. "I think I've seen your name in Austin Business Journal. You're the founder, right?" James nodded, and I noticed he didn't puff up with pride the way Mark did when his business was mentioned. "Started it about 5 years ago with a partner from graduate school. We're doing well, but Austin is a whole new challenge. The competition here is fierce." "Tell me about it," I said, checking my watch and realizing I still had a few minutes before my meeting. "The business landscape here is unlike anywhere else." "Speaking of which," James said, "I don't suppose you'd be interested in grabbing coffee sometime? I'd love to pick your brain about the Austin market. You've been here longer, and from what I remember of your strategic thinking, you probably have insights that could save me months of trial and error." It was a professional request, networking between old classmates, but something about it made me hesitate. When was the last time someone had sought out my professional opinion purely because they respected my expertise? "I'd like that," I heard myself saying. "Let me give you my card." As I handed James my business card, I noticed him studying it, with the same focused attention he used to give our case studies in school. "VP of Marketing," he read aloud. "Impressive, but not surprising. You always had the best grasp of integrated strategy in our program." That afternoon, my client presentation went exceptionally well. The CEO, a woman named Patricia Vance, who had built her software company from the ground up, was particularly enthusiastic about my proposed campaign. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need," she said as we wrapped up the meeting. "Sarah, I have to ask, have you ever considered consulting independently? Because the way you've approached our challenges shows a level of strategic thinking that most agencies can't match." "I haven't really thought about it," I replied, though that wasn't entirely true. The idea had been floating around in my mind for months, especially as I watched other colleagues leave TechVision to start their own firms. "Well, think about it," Patricia said, walking me to the elevator. "The right independent consultant could make a killing in this market, especially someone with your track record and understanding of both tech and traditional industries." On the drive home, Patricia's words echoed in my mind alongside my unexpected encounter with James. Two separate conversations, but both reminding me of a version of myself I had almost forgotten. The strategist, the innovator, the woman who saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. That evening, Mark was late getting home from another meeting with Jessica about their Houston trip. Emma was already in bed, and Linda was in her guest house watching her evening programs. I found myself alone in my home office, staring at my computer screen and thinking about roads not taken. I pulled up James's company website and spent an hour reading about green tech solutions. What struck me wasn't just their impressive client list or their innovative approach to sustainable technology. It was the company culture section, which featured employee testimonials about creative freedom, collaborative leadership, and work life. Integration rather than balance. One testimonial, from a woman who had joined as a marketing director, particularly caught my attention. At Green Tech, my ideas aren't just heard, they're implemented. I've never worked somewhere that so fully utilizes every team member's potential. James created an environment where success is measured by impact, not politics. I found myself imagining what it would be like to work in that kind of environment again, where my ideas would be valued rather than tolerated, where my ambitions would be supported rather than seen as inconvenient. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Great running into you today. I meant what I said about coffee. Are you free Thursday afternoon? There's a place called Radio Coffee on Barton Springs that's supposed to be good for business meetings." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Coffee with James felt like opening a door I had been keeping firmly closed. The door to possibilities beyond my current life. "Thursday at 3 works for me," I typed back. When Mark finally came home around 10, he found me still in my office, but this time I wasn't working on client materials. I was updating my LinkedIn profile, something I hadn't done in over a year. "You're up late," he said, loosening his tie as he stood in the doorway. "Just catching up on some things," I replied, not mentioning that I was refreshing my professional summary and adding recent accomplishments that I realized I had never properly documented. "How was your meeting with Patricia Vance?" Mark asked, and I was surprised he remembered. "Really well, actually. She was impressed with the campaign strategy." "Good," Mark said, but his attention was already shifting to his phone, checking messages from his own demanding day. "She asked if I'd ever considered independent consulting," I added, testing the waters. Mark looked up from his phone. "Consulting? That seems risky. You have a good thing going at TechVision." "It could be an opportunity to build something bigger," I said carefully. "Or it could be a way to lose the security you have now," Mark countered. "Besides, consulting means even more unpredictable hours, more travel. How would that work with Emma's schedule?" There it was again, the automatic assumption that my career flexibility was the solution to every family logistics challenge. "Other people make it work," I said. "Other people don't have the responsibilities we do," Mark replied, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Speaking of which, I need to finalize the Houston trip details with Jessica. We'll probably be gone for 4 days next week." 4 days? I looked up from my computer. "I thought you said it was just a quick trip to look at one property." "It was, but the opportunity is bigger than we initially thought. There are 3 potential acquisitions, plus meetings with investors who might fund our expansion into the Houston market." Mark's eyes lit up as he talked about the business possibilities. "That sounds like a big opportunity," I said, and I meant it. I could see how excited he was about the potential for growth. "It could change everything for us, Sarah. We're talking about scaling the business in a way that could set Emma up for life." "What's Jessica's role in all of this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Mark's expression shifted slightly. "She's my business partner. She's been instrumental in identifying these opportunities and building relationships with the Houston contacts. She's been instrumental," I repeated. It sounds like she's become pretty essential to your success. She's good at what she does, Mark said defensively. She's focused, dedicated, doesn't let personal issues interfere with business decisions. The implication hung in the air between us. Jessica was everything I apparently wasn't, professionally focused without the inconvenience of competing priorities. Well, I said, turning back to my computer, I hope the trip goes well. That's it? Mark sounded surprised. No concerns about me being gone for 4 days? No questions about logistics with Emma's schedule? I realized he was expecting me to object, to make his business trip about the inconvenience it would cause me. Instead, I found myself thinking about my coffee meeting with James, about Patricia's suggestion about independent consulting, about the version of myself I was starting to remember. I'm sure I can handle things here, I said simply. Mark stared at me for a moment, as if trying to figure out what had changed. Okay then, he said finally. I guess I'll finalize the arrangements with Jessica. After he left my office, I sat there, thinking about the contrast between our two conversations about professional opportunities. When Mark talked about his business expansion, it was visionary, essential, something that could change everything. When I mentioned consulting, it was risky, impractical, something that would complicate our family life. I opened a new email and began typing. Hi, James. I'm looking forward to our coffee meeting on Thursday. I've been thinking about your Austin market questions, and I have some ideas that might be helpful. I'm also curious to hear more about GreenTech's approach to marketing strategy. It sounds like you've built something special there. Before I could second-guess myself, I hit send. Thursday afternoon arrived with typical Texas heat, but I felt unusually energized as I walked into Radio Coffee. I had chosen my outfit carefully, professional but not overly formal, confident but approachable. I realized I was nervous, which surprised me. When was the last time I had felt nervous about a business meeting? James was already there, sitting at a corner table with his laptop open and what appeared to be a strategy document spread across the table. When he saw me, he closed the laptop and stood up with that same warm smile. Sarah, thanks for making time for this. Can I get you something to drink? As he returned with my iced coffee, I found myself studying him objectively for the first time since our unexpected reunion. James had aged well. There were a few lines around his eyes, and his hair was shorter than it had been in business school. But he had the same energy that had made him a natural leader in group projects. So, I said, settling into my chair, tell me about this Austin expansion. What specific challenges are you facing? For the next hour, James outlined GreenTech's goals for their Austin office, the competitive landscape they were navigating, and the marketing challenges they were encountering. What impressed me most was how he listened, really listened, to my responses, taking notes and asking follow-up questions that showed he valued my insights. This is incredibly helpful, he said as I finished explaining the nuances of Austin's business networking culture. You've identified 3 potential pitfalls that we were walking straight into. It's a unique market, I agreed. What works in Seattle or Dallas doesn't necessarily translate here. James leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sarah, can I ask you something? Are you happy at TechVision? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, you're obviously incredibly talented. Your strategic thinking is as sharp as it was in school, maybe sharper. But there's something. He paused, searching for the right words. You seem like you're operating at about 60% of your potential, like you're holding something back. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Was it that obvious? TechVision is a good company, I said carefully. I've learned a lot there. That's not what I asked, James said gently. I asked if you're happy. I looked out the window at the Austin traffic, buying myself time to think. When was the last time someone had asked me that question about my work? When was the last time I had even asked myself? "I'm comfortable," I said finally. James nodded slowly. Comfortable can be the enemy of exceptional. What do you mean? I mean that some of the most talented people I know have gotten trapped in comfortable situations that don't challenge them or utilize their full potential. They're successful enough that leaving feels risky, but not fulfilled enough to feel truly satisfied. His words hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. "What about you?" I asked, deflecting. "Are you happy with how green tech has developed?" "Most days, yes," James said honestly. "There are challenges, frustrations, moments when I wonder if I should have taken a safer path. But I wake up excited about what I'm building. I go to sleep thinking about problems I want to solve tomorrow. Even when it's hard, it feels right." I tried to remember the last time I had felt that way about my work. It had been years. "Can I tell you something?" James continued. "In business school, you were the person everyone wanted on their team for the capstone project. Not just because you were smart, lots of people were smart, but because you had this ability to see the big picture and figure out how all the pieces fit together. You could take a complex challenge and find a solution that no one else had considered." "That was a long time ago," I said. "Talent like that doesn't just disappear, Sarah. It might get buried under other responsibilities, other people's expectations, but it's still there." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and I found myself thinking about the woman James was describing, the strategist, the problem solver, the team leader. She felt like someone I used to know. "James," I said suddenly, "what would you do if you wanted to start over professionally, but you had significant personal obligations that made risk-taking complicated?" He considered the question seriously. "I'd probably start by figuring out what I really wanted, not what was expected of me or what seemed safest. Then I'd look for ways to move toward that goal without abandoning my responsibilities. Such as consulting on the side, building a client base gradually, testing ideas in low-risk ways, creating options for myself instead of feeling trapped by an all-or-nothing choice." I thought about Patricia's suggestion about independent consulting, about the startup marketing division opportunity I had mentioned to Mark, about the roads I had been afraid to explore. "That makes sense," I said. "Sarah," James said, leaning forward slightly, "I hope this doesn't sound presumptuous, but if you ever decided to explore consulting or independent work, I'd love to be your first client. Green tech could use someone with your strategic thinking, and I'd rather work with someone I trust than take chances with an unknown firm." The offer hung in the air between us, and I realized it represented something significant. Not just a potential business opportunity, but validation that my skills had value in the marketplace beyond my current comfortable but limiting situation. "That's generous of you to offer," I said. "It's not generosity," James replied. "It's good business. I've seen what you can do." As we wrapped up our meeting and walked toward the parking garage, I found myself thinking about the contrast between this conversation and my recent talks with Mark about my career. James saw potential where Mark saw inconvenience. James encouraged ambition where Mark cautioned against risk. "Sarah," James said as we reached my car, "I hope I haven't overstepped by suggesting consulting work. I just hate to see talent underutilized." "You haven't overstepped," I assured him. "Actually, you've given me a lot to think about." "Good," he smiled. "And if you decide you want to explore possibilities, you know where to find me." Driving home, I found myself energized in a way I hadn't felt in months. The conversation with James had reminded me that there was a whole world of professional possibilities beyond my current situation. Possibilities that someone who knew my capabilities thought I was qualified to pursue. For the first time in years, I began to imagine what it might look like to bet on myself instead of playing it safe. Part 4. The Breaking Point. The week Mark was in Houston with Jessica, I experienced something I hadn't felt in years. complete. Autonomy over my own schedule. Without having to coordinate around his meetings, accommodate his mother's expectations, or justify my work commitments, I discovered a rhythm that felt natural and energizing. Emma and I developed our own routine. I worked efficiently during her school hours, picked her up personally instead of relying on the aftercare program, and spent focused time with her in the evenings without the constant interruption of work, calls that I had previously felt guilty about taking. On Wednesday evening, as Emma worked on her art project at the kitchen table and I reviewed a campaign proposal on my laptop, she looked up and said something that caught me off guard. "Mommy, you seem happier this week." I paused in my typing. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "You're not as worried looking," she said, coloring carefully inside the lines of a butterfly. "And you laugh more. Out of the mouths of babes." My 8-year-old daughter had noticed something I was only beginning to acknowledge myself, that the constant tension I had been carrying was visible even to a child. "Maybe I am happier," I admitted, reaching over to smooth her hair. "Sometimes it's nice when it's just the two of us." Emma nodded seriously. "I like it too. We should do this more often." That night, after Emma was asleep, I found myself in my home office with a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in months. I opened my laptop and began working on something I had been avoiding, a business plan for my own consulting firm. Not because I had definitely decided to leave TechVision, but because I needed to know what my options were. I worked until nearly midnight, outlining services I could offer, identifying potential clients, calculating the financial requirements for independence. The numbers were encouraging. Between my savings and the potential income from consulting, I could maintain our lifestyle even if Mark's support became conditional on my compliance with his expectations. Thursday morning brought a call from James. "Sarah, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important, but I wanted to follow up on our coffee conversation. I've been thinking about your insights regarding Austin market entry, and I have a proposition." "I'm listening," I said, stepping out onto our back patio for privacy. "Green Tech is presenting to a major commercial development firm next week, one that could become our anchor client in Austin. I'd like to hire you as a consultant to help refine our presentation strategy. It would be a short-term project, maybe 10 hours of work over the next 2 weeks, but it would give you a chance to test the consulting waters without committing to anything long-term." My heart started beating faster. This was exactly the kind of opportunity I had been imagining, a chance to build independent client relationships while maintaining my current position. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" I asked. "The presentation is next Thursday. I'd need your input by early next week to incorporate your recommendations." "And the compensation?" $2,000 for the project, plus a bonus if we land the client. $2,000 for 10 hours of work, more than I made per hour at TechVision, and it would be mine, not subject to company policies or Mark's opinions about appropriate work-life balance. "I'm interested," I heard myself saying. "Send me the details, and I'll let you know by Friday." "Fantastic. I'll email you everything this afternoon." That evening, I called my sister Michelle in San Francisco, something I hadn't done in months. Michelle was a successful attorney who had navigated her own career challenges while raising 2 kids with her husband David. "Sarah, this is such a nice surprise." Michelle's voice was warm but surprised. "How are things in Austin?" "Complicated," I said, settling into my home office chair. "Can I ask you something? How did you handle it when David was unsupportive of your partnership track?" Michelle was quiet for a moment. "I remember that phase," she said finally. David was so worried. About the hours, the travel, the impact on the kids. He kept suggesting I consider a less demanding position, maybe in-house counsel somewhere. What changed his mind? Honestly, I stopped asking for his permission and started asking for his support. I explained that this was important to me, that I had worked too hard to settle for less than what I was capable of achieving. I told him I needed a partner who believed in my potential, not someone who was constantly trying to manage my ambitions. How did he respond? Not well, initially. We had some difficult conversations. But eventually, he realized that the woman he fell in love with was ambitious and driven, and trying to suppress those qualities wasn't going to make either of us happy. Michelle, I said carefully, what if Mark doesn't come around? What if he sees my ambitions as a threat to his comfort rather than something to support? Then you have to decide what matters more, his comfort or your fulfillment. Sarah, I've watched you dim your light for years trying to keep everyone else happy. At some point, you have to ask yourself what you want your life to look like. After we hung up, I sat in my office thinking about Michelle's words. When had I stopped asking for what I wanted and started settling for what was acceptable to everyone else? Friday morning, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I accepted James's consulting project. Mark returned from Houston that evening in excellent spirits. The trip had been successful. They had secured 2 of the 3 properties they had evaluated and established relationships with investors who were interested in funding their expansion. It's going to change everything for us, Mark said over dinner, his enthusiasm infectious. Jessica was instrumental in closing the deals. She has this ability to connect with people that really impress the investors. That's wonderful, I said, and I meant it. Mark's success was good for our family, regardless of the complicated feelings I had about his partnership with Jessica. How was your week? Mark asked, turning his attention to Emma, who was telling him about her art project. Good, I said simply. Emma and I had some nice time together. And work? Any emergencies while I was gone? This was my opening. Actually, I've been thinking about taking on a small consulting project. Mark's fork paused halfway to his mouth. What kind of consulting project? James Chen, you remember from business school, reached out about helping with a presentation strategy for his company. It's a short-term project, just a few hours of work. James Chen, Mark repeated, his tone shifting. The guy you ran into downtown last week? Yes. His company is expanding into Austin, and he thought my marketing expertise could be helpful. Mark set down his fork and looked at me directly. Sarah, I thought we had discussed this. You already have a demanding job. Why take on additional work that's going to add stress to your schedule? It's not additional stress, I said calmly. It's an opportunity to explore consulting, which we've talked about before. We've talked about it, and I've explained why it's not practical right now. Mark's voice was taking on that warning edge I had learned to recognize. Emma, sensing the tension, looked between us uncertainly. Can I be excused? I want to finish my homework. Of course, sweetheart, I said, helping her clear her plate. After Emma left the kitchen, Mark leaned back in his chair and studied me. What's really going on here, Sarah? First, the startup marketing division. Now consulting projects with old college friends. It feels like you're looking for ways to complicate our lives. I'm looking for ways to grow professionally, I replied. The same way you just spent 4 days in Houston exploring expansion opportunities. That's different. My business expansion benefits our family directly. This consulting thing sounds like you're building relationships outside our marriage. The accusation hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift inside me. A line being crossed that I couldn't ignore. Mark, James is offering me professional work based on my expertise. The fact that you're framing it as some kind of threat to our marriage says more about your insecurities than it does about my intentions. Mark's face flushed. My insecurities? I'm not the one suddenly reconnecting with old male friends and making plans that exclude my input. I don't need your input on every professional decision I make, I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. Just like you don't need mine when you travel to Houston with Jessica or work late on development projects. Jessica is my business partner. We're building something together that benefits our family. And James is a potential client. I'm building something too. My own consulting practice that could benefit our family just as much as your real estate deals. Mark stood up abruptly, pacing to the kitchen window. This isn't about the money, Sarah. It's about priorities. Emma needs consistency. Our marriage needs attention. You're already stretched thin with your current job. Our marriage needs attention, I repeated. When was the last time you asked me about my day at work? When was the last time you celebrated one of my professional achievements? When was the last time you supported my ambitions instead of finding reasons why they're inconvenient? Mark turned back to me, his expression hardening. I support you. I support our family. But I won't support decisions that prioritize your career over our responsibilities. What responsibilities, Mark? Emma's thriving. I'm succeeding at work. Our household runs smoothly. What exactly am I neglecting by taking on a consulting project? You're neglecting us, Mark said, his voice rising. You're neglecting what we built together. You're choosing outsiders over your own family. I stared at him, realizing that we were having two completely different conversations. Mark saw my professional growth as a threat to his control, while I saw his resistance as a threat to my identity. Mark, I said quietly, I need you to hear me. I am not choosing anyone over our family. I am choosing to fully use the talents and abilities that God gave me. I am choosing to build something meaningful with my career, the same way you're building something meaningful with yours. It's not the same. It is exactly the same, I interrupted. The only difference is that you expect me to ask permission for opportunities that you would never think to discuss with me. We stood there in our kitchen, the distance between us feeling wider than it had ever been. I could see Mark calculating, trying to find the right combination of words that would make me back down, return to the manageable version of myself he preferred. Sarah, he said finally, his tone shifting to something softer but still manipulative. I just want what's best for our family. Can't you see that all this extra work, all these new relationships, they're pulling you away from what really matters? What really matters to you, I corrected, not what matters to me. Fine, Mark said, his patience clearly exhausted. Do your consulting project, but don't expect me to accommodate the schedule complications it creates. And don't come to me when it interferes with Emma's needs or our family commitments. The conditional support felt worse than outright opposition. Mark was giving me permission to pursue my goals as long as they didn't require any adjustment on his part. As long as I could manage my consulting work, my TechVision job, Emma's schedule, and his expectations without any of it impacting his comfort or convenience. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Mark slept beside me. I realized that we had reached a crossroads that had been years in the making. Mark wanted a wife who would support his ambitions while minimizing her own. I wanted a partner who would celebrate my success as enthusiastically as I celebrated his. For the first time in our marriage, I admitted to myself that those two visions might be incompatible. The following Monday, I threw myself into James's consulting project with an energy I hadn't felt in years. The work was challenging, creative, and allowed me to apply strategic thinking in ways that my routine responsibilities at TechVision rarely required. James and I met twice that week to refine the presentation strategy, and each meeting reminded me why I had chosen marketing as my career in the first place. I loved the puzzle of understanding what motivated potential clients, the creativity of crafting messages that resonated, the satisfaction of developing strategies that delivered results. This is brilliant, James said as we reviewed the final presentation materials. You've identified angles that I never would have considered. This gives us a real competitive advantage. It's good work, I agreed, feeling proud of what we had accomplished together. Sarah, I have to ask, how are you feeling about the consulting experience? Is it what you expected? I considered the question carefully. It's reminded me how Much I love strategic problem solving when I have the freedom to really dig into a challenge. And, James prompted, sensing there was more. And it's made me realize how constrained I've been feeling in my current situation. Not just at TechVision, but in general. I've been operating within limitations that I didn't even realize I had accepted. James nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes, we adjust to circumstances gradually, and we don't notice how much we've compromised until we get a taste of what's possible. Exactly, I said. This project has been a reminder of what I'm capable of when I'm not trying to fit my work around everyone else's expectations. Well, for what it's worth, I think you should seriously consider doing more consulting work. You have a gift for this, and there's definitely a market for your skills in Austin. That Thursday, James delivered the presentation to the commercial development firm, and by Friday afternoon, he called with the news that Green Tech had been selected as their sustainability partner, a contract worth over $500,000 in the first year alone. "Sarah, I can't thank you enough," James said, his excitement evident over the phone. "Your strategy was the difference maker. They specifically mentioned the market positioning approach you recommended." "I'm so glad it worked out," I said, feeling genuinely thrilled by the success. "I promised you a bonus if we landed the client, and I meant it. I'm sending you an additional $3,000 on top of your consulting fee. $5,000 total for a project that had taken me 15 hours to complete and had been more engaging than anything I had done at TechVision in months." The financial validation was nice, but the professional satisfaction was even better. That evening, I found myself in an unusually good mood as I prepared dinner. Emma was setting the table, chattering about her day at school, and even Linda's. Presence couldn't dampen my spirits. When Mark arrived home, I was genuinely excited to share the news about the successful presentation. "The Green Tech project went really well," I said as he loosened his tie. "They landed the client, and James said my strategy recommendations were instrumental in their success." Mark looked up from his phone with a neutral expression. "That's nice. I'm glad your side project worked out." Side project. The dismissive tone was subtle but unmistakable. "It was more than a side project," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "It was a significant consulting engagement that resulted in a major client win." "I'm sure it was satisfying," Mark said, his attention already drifting back to his phone. I felt the familiar frustration building, but this time it was mixed with something new. A clarity about the contrast between how James valued my contributions and how Mark dismissed them. "Mark," I said, setting down the serving spoon I had been holding, "I made $5,000 on this project." That got his attention. $5,000? For 1 week of work? For 15 hours of strategic consulting that helped a company land a $500,000 contract, I corrected. Mark was quiet for a moment, processing the financial implications. "That's significant." "It is significant, and it's made me realize that there's real market demand for my skills as an independent consultant." I could see Mark's mind working, calculating the potential income, weighing it against his concerns about my expanding professional independence. "Sarah," he said finally, "I need you to be careful about getting too invested in this consulting idea. One successful project doesn't mean you're ready to leave a secure position." "I'm not talking about leaving TechVision," I said, though the idea had certainly crossed my mind. "I'm talking about building additional income streams that could benefit our family." "Additional income streams that require time and energy you're already stretched for," Mark countered. "What happens when you have multiple consulting projects and a TechVision crisis at the same time? Something has to give, and it's usually family time that suffers." There it was again, the assumption that my professional growth would automatically come at the expense of my family responsibilities, while his business expansion was treated as an investment in our family's future. "Mark, you traveled to Houston for 4 days to explore business opportunities. You work late regularly. You schedule meetings that conflict with Emma's activities. But somehow my consulting work is the threat to our family stability? It's different, Mark said. But his tone suggested he was starting to realize how weak that argument sounded. How is it different? I pressed. Because my business is established. It's our primary income source. It's what pays for this house, Emma's school, our lifestyle. And my consulting income could contribute to all of those things too, if you'd support it instead of constantly finding reasons why it's problematic. Mark sat down heavily at the kitchen table, running his hands through his hair. Sarah, I don't want to fight about this. I just want us to be practical. You have a good job, we have a good life. Why risk that for something uncertain? Because uncertain doesn't necessarily mean risky, I said, sitting across from him. It might mean opportunity. It might mean growth. It might mean building something even better than what we have now. Or it might mean jeopardizing what we've worked so hard to create, Mark replied. I looked at my husband across our kitchen table and realized that we had fundamentally different approaches to risk and opportunity. Mark saw my professional growth as a threat to our stability. I saw his resistance as a threat to my potential. Mark, I said quietly, I need you to support my consulting work. Not just tolerate it, but actively support it. Celebrate my successes. Accommodate my schedule sometimes. Encourage me to pursue opportunities that could benefit our family. Mark was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with what I was asking. I can try, he said finally, but his tone suggested it would be an effort rather than a natural response. I need more than trying, I said. I need a partner who believes in my potential as much as I believe in yours. Sarah, I do believe in your potential, but I also believe in being responsible, in protecting what we've built together. Protecting. What we've built shouldn't mean preventing me from building something more. We sat in silence, both of us recognizing that we had reached an impasse that couldn't be resolved with compromise. Either Mark would learn to genuinely support my professional ambitions, or I would have to decide whether I could continue in a marriage where my growth was seen as a threat to our stability. The kitchen felt heavy with unspoken tensions, and I realized that my successful consulting project had illuminated problems in our marriage that had been growing in the shadows for years. Part 5. First Voice. The weekend after my confrontation with Mark about the consulting project, something shifted in our household dynamic. I had expected him to sulk or continue arguing about my professional pursuits, but instead, he seemed to be making an effort to be more supportive, or at least less openly critical. Saturday morning, he even asked about my next potential consulting opportunity, though I could tell the question was forced rather than genuine interest. James mentioned he might have another project coming up, I said as we prepared breakfast together. Nothing definite yet, but he's been getting referrals from other business owners who heard about the green tech success. That's good, Mark said, and I could hear him actively trying to sound encouraging. I mean, if you want to pursue more consulting work, I'll try to be more supportive. The word try hung between us, and I realized that his effort, while appreciated, still felt conditional and reluctant. I appreciate that, I said, flipping pancakes while Emma set the table. I think this could really develop into something significant. Let's make sure we're communicating about schedules and commitments, Mark added. I want to support you, but I also want to make sure we're both on the same page about family priorities. There it was, the subtle reminder that my professional growth needed to be managed and monitored to ensure it didn't interfere with his definition of appropriate family balance. That afternoon, while Mark was playing golf with his business associates, and Emma was at a friend's house, I found myself alone in the house with Linda for the first time in weeks. I was in my office working on a proposal for a potential new client when she knocked on the door. Sarah, dear, do you have a minute? Linda's tone was unusually tentative. "Of course," I said, closing my laptop and gesturing for her to sit in the chair across from my desk. Linda settled herself carefully, smoothing her skirt in the way she did when she was preparing to say something important. "I wanted to talk to you about this consulting business," she began, and I felt my defenses immediately rise. "What about it?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Well, I can see how excited you are about it, and I know Mark is trying to be supportive, but I'm worried about the impact on Emma." "What impact on Emma?" I asked, though I could already guess where this conversation was heading. "She's at such an important age, and children need consistency. They need to know that their mother is available when they need her. I've watched so many families struggle when the mother gets too focused on career advancement." I felt the familiar frustration building, but this time, instead of swallowing it or deflecting, I found myself responding with a directness that surprised both of us. "Linda, Emma is thriving. Her grades are excellent. She's involved in activities she enjoys, and she has a strong support system. My consulting work hasn't negatively impacted her in any way." "But it could," Linda pressed. "These things have a way of escalating. First it's one project, then multiple projects, then travel. Then what?" I interrupted. "Then Emma might see her mother as a successful professional woman who builds something meaningful with her talents? That sounds like a positive role model to me." Linda looked taken aback by my response. In the past, I had always listened politely to her concerns and either agreed or deflected. I had never directly challenged her assumptions. "I'm just thinking about what's best for the family," Linda said, her tone becoming more defensive. "I understand that you care about our family," I replied, "but I think we have different definitions of what's best. I believe what's best for Emma is seeing both her parents pursue meaningful work that utilizes their abilities and contributes to our family's success." "But Mark's work is necessary," Linda said. "He's the primary provider." "And my work is also necessary," I said, firmly. "It contributes significantly to our family's financial security, and it's important to me personally. Those aren't mutually exclusive things." Linda was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with my unexpected assertiveness. "Sarah, I hope you don't think I'm trying to interfere," she said finally. "Linda, I think you're trying to be helpful, but your help feels like judgment about my choices. I need you to trust that I can balance my professional commitments with my responsibilities as a mother and wife. I just don't want to see you make mistakes that you'll regret later," Linda said, her voice softer now. "I appreciate that concern," I replied, "but I need to make my own decisions about my career, even if they sometimes lead to mistakes. That's how adults learn and grow." After Linda left my office, I sat there feeling simultaneously proud of myself for speaking up and shaken by how difficult it had been to assert my position. When had I become so unaccustomed to defending my own choices? That evening, Emma bounded into the kitchen where I was preparing dinner, full of excitement about her playdate. "Mommy, guess what? Katie's mom is starting a new business. She's going to make jewelry and sell it online. Katie says her mom is really excited about it." "That sounds wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased to hear about another woman pursuing entrepreneurial goals. "Are you going to start a business too?" Emma asked, climbing onto a stool at the kitchen counter. The question caught me off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "Well, you're doing those consulting projects, and you seem happier when you talk about them, like Katie's mom when she talks about her jewelry business." I paused in my dinner preparation, struck by my daughter's perceptiveness. "Would you like it if I started my own business?" Emma considered the question seriously. "I think so. You're really smart, and you're good at helping people with their work problems. Plus, you smile more when you're talking about your projects." "Do I really smile more?" I asked, curious about her observation. "Yeah, and you don't seem as worried all the time. Daddy's been in a better mood too since he got back from Houston." Emma's innocent observation highlighted something I had been trying to articulate, that my professional fulfillment affected the whole family dynamic, not just my own happiness. "Emma," I said, sitting down across from her, "how would you feel if Mommy had to travel sometimes for work like Daddy does?" "Would you bring me back presents?" she asked with a grin. "Probably," I laughed. "Then I think it would be okay, as long as you always come back." "I would always come back," I assured her. "Then I think you should do whatever makes you happy," Emma said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children sometimes possess. That Monday, I received an email from Patricia Vance, the CEO who had suggested I consider independent consulting. She wanted to meet for lunch to discuss a potential project that was significantly larger than anything I had worked on with James. "Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding independent consulting," Patricia wrote. "I have a project that might be perfect for someone with your strategic background. Would you be available for lunch this week to discuss it?" I stared at the email for several minutes before responding. This could be the opportunity that would allow me to transition from occasional consulting projects to building a real independent practice. I'd be very interested in hearing about the project, I wrote back. "Does that mean you support me taking on Patricia's project?" I asked. Mark took a deep breath. "Yes, I support you taking on Patricia's project, and I'll try to be genuinely supportive, not just tolerant." That night, I lay in bed feeling cautiously optimistic about our conversation. Mark's willingness to acknowledge his double standard and commit to being more supportive felt like a breakthrough. But I also recognized that real change would require consistent effort from both of us. Him to overcome his fears about my independence, and me to maintain clear boundaries about what I needed from our partnership. The next morning, I called Patricia and accepted her project offer, structuring it as a part-time engagement that would allow me to maintain my position at TechVision while building my consulting practice. For the first time in years, I felt like I was actively choosing the direction of my professional life instead of simply responding to other people's expectations and limitations. It felt like the beginning of becoming myself again. 6 months into Patricia's consulting project, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. The work was challenging, intellectually stimulating, and financially rewarding beyond my expectations. More importantly, it had reconnected me with the professional confidence I had lost somewhere in the years of accommodating everyone else's needs. The project had evolved beyond Patricia's initial scope. Her software company's expansion strategy had been so successful that she had referred me to 3 other CEOs in her network. By the end of the 6 months, I had a waiting list of potential clients and was earning more from consulting than I made at TechVision. The morning that would change everything started with an email from Austin Business Journal. They wanted to feature me in an article about successful women entrepreneurs in the tech consulting space. The journalist, Rebecca Martinez, had heard about my work through several clients and wanted to interview me about building a consulting practice while maintaining work-life balance. "Sarah, your reputation in the Austin business community has grown incredibly quickly," Rebecca said during our phone interview. "What's your secret to building such strong client relationships in such a short time?" "I think it's about really listening to what clients need and developing strategies that address their specific challenges rather than offering one-size-fits-all solutions," I replied, sitting in my home office while Emma played quietly in the living room. "And how do you balance the demands of consulting with family life? That's something many of our readers struggle with." "It's definitely a challenge," I admitted. "But I've found that when you're doing work you're passionate about, you find ways to make it work. My daughter has actually been very supportive of my consulting work because she can see how much I enjoy it." What advice would you give to other women who are considering making the transition to independent consulting? I thought carefully about my response. I'd say don't wait for the perfect moment or for everyone around you to fully support your decision. Sometimes you have to bet on yourself and trust that the people who love you will eventually see the value in your success. The article was published the following Tuesday, and by Thursday morning, my phone hadn't stopped ringing. The exposure had generated inquiries from companies I had only dreamed of working with, including 2 Fortune 500 firms looking for marketing strategy consultants. That evening, I was reviewing proposals when Mark came home from work earlier than usual. He had been making an effort to be more present and supportive since our conversation about the Patricia project, and I could see genuine pride in his expression when he talked about my success. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing me hello, in a way that felt more connected than it had in months. "Busy," I said, closing my laptop. The Austin Business Journal article generated a lot of interest. I spent most of the day fielding calls from potential clients. "That's fantastic," Mark said, and I could hear that he meant it. "You're really building something impressive." "I am," I agreed, feeling a surge of pride. "Mark, I need to talk to you about something. Some of these new opportunities are larger than anything I've worked on before. One company wants me to lead a complete rebrand for their national expansion. It's a year-long project worth over $100,000. Mark's eyebrows rose. $100,000? Yes, but it would require some travel, probably 2 or 3 trips per month to their headquarters in Denver. I watched Mark's face carefully, looking for signs of the old resistance to my professional commitments. "How much travel are we talking about?" he asked, and I was relieved to hear curiosity rather than opposition in his voice. "Probably 3 to 4 days per month. Emma could come with me sometimes during school breaks, and my parents have offered to help with childcare when needed." Mark was quiet for a moment, and I could see him genuinely considering the logistics rather than immediately focusing on the complications. "Sarah, this sounds like an incredible opportunity," he said finally. "If you want to pursue it, I'll support you however I can." The words I had been waiting years to hear finally came naturally from him, without the grudging tone or conditional qualifiers that had characterized his previous attempts at support. "Really?" I asked, wanting to be sure I had heard correctly. "Really. I've watched you flourish over the past 6 months, and I can see how much this work means to you. I was wrong to see your success as a threat, instead of celebrating it as an asset to our family." That night, after Emma was asleep, Mark and I had the most honest conversation we'd had in years. "I owe you an apology," Mark said as we sat together, on our back patio, looking out at the Austin skyline. "I spent so much time worried about you changing that I didn't realize I was trying to prevent you from becoming the person you were meant to be." "We both made mistakes," I replied. "I should have stood up for myself sooner instead of building resentment." "What changed for you?" Mark asked. "What made you finally start prioritizing your own goals?" I thought about the question carefully. I think it was realizing that I had become a smaller version of myself to make everyone else comfortable. And that wasn't actually making anyone happy, including me. "You're right," Mark said. "You're more like the woman I fell in love with now than you've been in years. Confident, ambitious, excited about your work." "And you're more like the supportive partner I thought I was marrying," I replied. "It's nice to feel like we're on the same team again." The Denver project turned out to be even more successful than I had anticipated. The client was thrilled with my rebranding strategy, and the campaign launch exceeded their projected metrics by 30%. More importantly, the project established me as a national consultant, not just a regional one. By the time the project concluded, I had made a decision that I had been contemplating for months. I submitted my resignation to TechVision and officially launched Mitchell Marketing Strategies as a full-time consulting firm. The transition was smoother than I had expected, partly because TechVision offered to retain me as an external consultant for their biggest accounts. It was validation that my expertise was valued and that leaving didn't mean burning bridges. Emma adjusted to the changes better than I had hoped. She enjoyed the flexibility of my schedule, which allowed me to attend More of her school events than I had been able to when I was tied to a traditional office schedule. She also loved hearing about my different clients and the creative challenges I was solving. "Mommy, you seem so much happier now," she told me one evening as I helped her with homework. "You smile more and you're not worried all the time." "I am happier," I agreed. "Sometimes adults have to make changes to become the best version of themselves, just like kids do." "Are you the best version of yourself now?" Emma asked with the directness that only children possess. "I'm getting there," I said, realizing that it was true. The real test of our new dynamic came when Mark's business hit a rough patch. A major deal fell through, and he had to lay off 2 employees, including Jessica, whose role had become redundant as the company scaled back. I found Mark in his home office one evening, staring at financial projections with a defeated expression. "I'm available for lunch Thursday or Friday." That evening, I decided to tell Mark about Patricia's email, testing whether his promise to be more supportive extended to bigger opportunities. "Remember Patricia Vance, the CEO I mentioned who suggested consulting?" I began as we cleaned up after dinner. "The software company woman?" Mark asked. "Yes, she's reached out about a potential project, something larger than the green tech work." Mark paused in loading the dishwasher. "How much larger?" "I don't know yet. We're meeting for lunch to discuss it." "Sarah," Mark said, turning. "To face me, I want to be supportive of your consulting work, but I need to understand what we're talking about in terms of time commitment and scope." I could hear the effort in his voice. He was trying to be encouraging while still expressing his concerns. "I appreciate that," I said. "I don't have details yet, but I promise to keep you informed as I learn more." "And if it's something that would require significant time or travel?" Mark asked. "Then we'll discuss it and figure out how to make it work for our family," I replied, emphasizing the word "our." Mark nodded slowly. "Okay, I can live with that approach." Thursday's lunch with Patricia exceeded my expectations in every way. The project she described was a comprehensive marketing strategy overhaul for her company's expansion into new markets, exactly the kind of complex strategic work that I thrived on. "We're looking at a 6-month engagement," Patricia explained. "Over salad. The scope would include market research, competitive analysis, messaging strategy, and implementation planning. It's the kind of project that could really establish you as a premier consultant in the Austin market." "What's the timeline for getting started?" I asked, trying to contain my excitement. "Ideally, we'd like to begin within the next month. The compensation would be $40,000, paid in monthly installments." $40,000, nearly half of my annual salary at TechVision, for 6 months of consulting work that would allow me to build exactly the kind of strategic expertise I had been craving. "Patricia, this sounds like an incredible opportunity," I said carefully, "but I need to be transparent with you. I'm currently employed full-time at TechVision." "I assumed as much," Patricia replied. "The question is whether you're ready to make the transition to independent consulting full-time, or if you'd prefer to structure this as a part-time engagement while you maintain your current position." "What would part-time look like?" I asked. "We could extend the timeline to 9 months and structure the work around your existing schedule. It would be less intensive, but still substantial enough to establish your consulting reputation." I felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. This was the moment where I had to decide whether I was ready to fully commit to building my own practice or continue trying to balance everyone else's comfort with my own professional growth. "Can I think about it and get back to you early next week?" I asked. "Of course. But Sarah, I want you to know that we're specifically interested in working with you because of your strategic thinking and your understanding of both tech and traditional industries. This isn't a project we'd entrust to just anyone." Walking back to my car after lunch, I felt a combination of exhilaration and terror. Patricia's project represented everything I had been working toward: the chance to utilize my skills fully, build my reputation as an independent consultant, and earn substantial income doing work I genuinely loved. It also represented a level of professional commitment that would require significant changes in how I managed my time and priorities. That evening, I sat Mark down for what I knew would be a crucial conversation about our future. The project, Patricia described as substantial, I began, outlining the scope, timeline, and compensation. Mark listened without interrupting, and I could see him processing the implications. $40,000 for 6 months of work, he said finally. That's significant income. It is, and it's the kind of project that could establish me as a serious consultant in Austin. But it would also mean a major change in your time commitment and availability, Mark observed. Yes, it would. Even if I structure it as part-time work, it would require more hours than my current consulting projects. Mark was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his response carefully. Sarah, I want to support your professional growth, but I also need to be honest about my concerns. This level of consulting work feels like it would fundamentally change our family dynamic. It might, I agreed, but it might change it for the better. More income, more professional fulfillment for me, and the opportunity to build something that could benefit our family long term. Or it could add stress and complexity that we don't need, Mark countered. I felt my frustration building, but this time I didn't try to suppress it. Mark, when you expanded your business to Houston, did you worry about adding stress and complexity to our family? When you started working with Jessica on bigger projects, did you question whether the additional income was worth the change in family dynamic? That's different, Mark started, but I held up my hand. It's not different. It's exactly the same. You saw an opportunity for professional growth and financial benefit, and you pursued it. I supported you, accommodated the changes in your schedule, and celebrated your success. Now I'm asking for the same support. Mark looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him recognizing the parallel I was drawing. You're right, he said finally. I have been applying a double standard. I don't want to fight about this, I said, my voice softer now. I want us to be partners who support each other's success. But I need you to genuinely support my consulting work, not just tolerate it. What would genuine support look like? Mark asked. It would look like celebrating my successes the way I celebrate yours. It would look like accommodating my schedule, sometimes instead of always expecting me to accommodate yours. It would look like believing in my potential instead of constantly worrying about how my growth might inconvenience you. Mark was quiet for several minutes, and I could see him genuinely considering what I was asking. Sarah, I think I've been afraid that your professional success would somehow diminish my role in our family, he said finally. That if you became too independent, you wouldn't need me anymore. His honesty surprised me, and I felt a wave of compassion for him. Mark, my professional success doesn't threaten our partnership. It enhances it. Two successful people building a life together is stronger than one successful person carrying the financial responsibility alone. I can see that intellectually, Mark said, but emotionally, it's been harder to accept. I understand that, I replied, but I need you to work through those feelings instead of letting them limit my opportunities. You're right, Mark said, reaching across the table to take my hand. I'll do better. I want to do better. How bad is it? I asked, sitting down across from his desk. Bad enough that I'm going to have to take a significant pay cut and possibly sell some assets to keep the company afloat, Mark said, rubbing his temples. What can I do to help? I asked. Mark looked up at me with surprise. What do you mean? I mean, we're partners. My consulting income is substantial now. If you need to reduce your salary temporarily to save the business, my income can cover our family expenses. Mark stared at me for a long moment. Sarah, I can't ask you to support our family while I try to rebuild my business. You're not asking, I said firmly. I'm offering. The same way you supported our family when I was building my consulting practice." "That's different," Mark started, then stopped himself. "Actually, no, it's not different. It's exactly the same." "Exactly the same," I agreed. "Partners support each other through challenging times." For the next 8 months, my consulting income was our primary source of financial stability, while Mark restructured his business. Instead of feeling resentful or burdened by the responsibility, I felt proud to be able to contribute so significantly to our family's security. Mark's gratitude and respect for my professional success deepened. During this period, he saw firsthand how the consulting practice I had built was not just personally fulfilling, but genuinely valuable to our family's financial well-being. "I can't believe I ever saw your career ambitions as a threat," Mark said one evening as we reviewed our family budget. "Your success has literally saved our family during the most challenging period of my business." "That's what partnerships look like," I replied, each person contributing their strengths when they're needed most. By the time Mark's business had recovered and stabilized, our marriage had transformed. We had become genuine partners who celebrated each other's successes and supported each other through challenges. The power dynamic that had characterized our early years together had evolved into something more balanced and sustainable. The moment that crystallized this transformation came during Emma's 9th birthday party. I was managing the celebration while simultaneously handling a client crisis via phone and email. In the past, Mark would have been frustrated by my divided attention. Instead, he seamlessly took over party management and quietly handled the logistics so I could focus on resolving the work issue. "Is everything okay?" he asked after I hung up from a call with a panicked client. "It is now," I said, grateful for his support. "Thank you for handling everything here." "Of course," Mark said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We're a team." That evening, after Emma's friends had gone home and the house was quiet, I found myself reflecting on how much our lives had changed. 2 years earlier, I had been a woman who felt invisible in her own home, whose professional achievements were minimized, whose ambitions were seen as selfish. Now, I was running a successful consulting firm, contributing significantly to our family's financial security, and married to a man who genuinely celebrated my success. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick, but it had been worth every difficult conversation and uncomfortable moment of growth. A year later, I received an invitation that would have seemed impossible during the darkest days of our marriage. Austin Business Journal wanted to honor me as their Entrepreneur of the Year for building one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in Central Texas. The awards ceremony was held at the Four Seasons downtown, and Mark was genuinely excited to attend as my date. As I prepared my acceptance speech, I thought about the woman I had been and the woman I had become. 2 years ago, I was VP of marketing at a successful company, but I felt like I was disappearing. I began my speech. I had allowed other people's comfort to become more important than my own growth. I had accepted limitations that I had never consciously chosen. I looked out at the audience of business leaders, many of whom had become clients or colleagues, over the past 2 years. The woman who stands before you tonight didn't emerge overnight. She was always there, but she had been buried under years of accommodation, compromise, and other people's expectations. Building Mitchell marketing strategies wasn't just about starting a business. It was about reclaiming myself. The applause was warm and sustained, but what mattered most to me was seeing Mark in the audience, beaming with pride and respect. The most important lesson I've learned is that supporting the people you love doesn't mean limiting your own potential. Real partnerships are built on mutual respect, shared sacrifice, and celebrating each other's success. When both people in a relationship are encouraged to become their best selves, everyone wins. After the ceremony, Mark and I walked hand in hand through downtown Austin, the city lights reflecting off the lake and the warm Texas air wrapping around us like a blessing. "I'm proud of you," Mark said, stopping to face me on the pedestrian bridge. not just for the award, but for having the courage to become who you were meant to be. We both had to have courage, I replied. You had to have the courage to support my growth even when it felt threatening to you. Best decision I ever made, Mark said, pulling me close. Well, second best. Marrying you was the first. As we drove home that night, I thought about the woman I had been when this journey started, tired, resentful, feeling smaller every day. I thought about the gradual awakening, the difficult conversations, the moments of standing up for myself. That had felt terrifying at the time. Now, I was running a business that I loved, married to a man who truly supported my ambitions, and raising a daughter who saw me as an example of what was possible when women refused to accept limitations. The house was quiet when we arrived. Home. Emma already asleep after staying with Mark's parents for the evening. I changed out of my formal dress and into comfortable clothes, then sat in my home office looking at the award on my desk. My phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Someone had tagged me in a post about successful women entrepreneurs, and I clicked through to see dozens of comments from women sharing their own stories of professional transformation and growth. One comment particularly caught my attention. Reading about Sarah's journey gave me the courage to start my own consulting practice. If she can build something this successful while maintaining her family commitments, maybe I can too. I smiled, realizing that my story had become more than just personal transformation. It had become inspiration for other women who were struggling with the same challenges I had faced. I opened my laptop and began typing a LinkedIn post of my own. Tonight, I was honored to receive Austin Business Journal's Entrepreneur of the Year award. 2 years ago, I was a successful marketing executive who felt like she was disappearing into a role that had become too small for her potential. Today, I run a thriving consulting firm that has exceeded every goal I set when I started this journey. The transformation wasn't easy. It required difficult conversations, uncomfortable growth, and the courage to prioritize my own potential even when it felt selfish. It required building a partnership with my husband based on mutual support rather than traditional roles that no longer served either of us. To the women reading this who are feeling trapped in comfortable but limiting situations, you don't have to choose between personal fulfillment and family responsibility. You can have both, but it requires advocating for yourself and refusing to accept other people's limitations as your own. Your dreams matter. Your potential matters. You matter. Don't wait for permission to become who you're meant to be. I posted the message and closed my laptop, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and completion. The journey from invisible housewife to successful entrepreneur had taught me that the most important relationship you can nurture is the one with yourself, your own ambitions, your own potential, your own worth. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to bed, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was confident, successful, and genuinely happy. She looked like someone who had fought for her dreams and won. She looked like someone I was proud to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.